Take a moment right now and ask yourself this question. What would happen if you stopped needing anyone's approval? What if tomorrow morning you woke up and suddenly, miraculously, the opinions of others meant absolutely nothing to you? Would you become cruel? Would you lose your humanity? Or would you finally become who you were always meant to be? Stay with me for the next few minutes, because what you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you see yourself and everyone around you. This isn't another feel-good message about positive thinking. This is about the raw psychology of personal transformation, the kind that makes other people uncomfortable just by witnessing it. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone suddenly goes quiet? When your presence alone shifts the energy. Most people think this comes from confidence or charisma. But Carl Jung discovered something far more profound. He found that certain individuals develop what he called an integrated shadow, a complete acceptance of all parts of themselves, including the dark ones. And when someone achieves this integration, they radiate a different kind of energy. Not the desperate need to be liked that most people project, but a self-contained completeness that both attracts and terrifies others. Jung spent years studying why some people seem unbreakable while others crumble at the slightest criticism. And his conclusion was revolutionary. Those who become truly powerful don't fight their demons. They befriend them. They don't suppress their darkness. They channel it. They don't seek the light. They become it, shadows and all. Think about the last time someone really got under your skin. That person who knew exactly which buttons to push. Who could make you lose your composure with just a few words. Now imagine if those buttons simply stopped working. Not because you learned to control your reactions, but because you transformed the very core of what triggers you. This is what psychologists call emotional alchemy, turning your weaknesses into weapons. Sigmund Freud, despite his many controversial theories, understood something crucial about human nature. He realized that most of our behaviors are driven by unconscious forces we don't even recognize. We think we're making conscious choices, but really, we're puppets dancing to strings we can't see. The ego, that part of us that desperately needs to maintain a certain image, it runs the show without us even knowing it. But here's where it gets interesting. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who terrified society with his radical ideas, proposed something that still makes people uncomfortable today. He said that humans have the capacity to overcome their own nature, to literally recreate themselves from scratch. He called this process becoming the Übermensch, not a Superman in the comic book sense, but someone who has transcended ordinary human limitations through sheer force of will. Nietzsche watched how most people live their entire lives following scripts written by others, society's expectations, family traditions, religious doctrines. And he saw this as a form of psychological slavery, but he also saw a way out, a path so difficult that most would never even attempt it. The path of complete self-creation. Imagine for a moment that everything you believe about right and wrong, everything you've been taught about success and failure, everything you think you know about who you are. Imagine it's all just programming, like software installed in your brain without your permission. Niccolò Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He wrote about power not because he was evil, but because he saw through the illusions that keep most people controlled. Machiavelli knew that morality itself could be a weapon, used by those in power to keep others in line. He observed that those who play by the rules usually lose to those who write them. Not because rule breakers are stronger, but because they understand the game at a deeper level. They see the invisible structures that everyone else takes for granted. This is why truly powerful people often seem to operate by different rules. They're not necessarily breaking laws or hurting others. They've simply stopped playing the games that everyone else doesn't even realize they're playing. They've achieved what modern psychologists call metacognition, the ability to think about thinking itself. Abraham Maslow studied exceptional individuals throughout his career, people who seemed to operate at a different level than everyone else. He called them self-actualized. But what he discovered went far beyond simple success or achievement. These people had undergone a fundamental psychological transformation. They no longer sought validation because they had become their own source of validation. They no longer feared judgment because they had become their own judge. But here's the part that Maslow didn't emphasize enough. This transformation is brutal. It requires you to die psychologically and be reborn as something entirely different. Every belief you hold dear, every identity you've carefully constructed, every comfortable lie you tell yourself, all of it has to burn. Viktor Frankl survived the Nazi concentration camps and emerged with insights that challenge everything we think we know about human resilience. He discovered that even in the most horrific circumstances, even when everything has been taken from you, there remains one freedom that no one can touch. The freedom to choose your response. The freedom to create meaning from suffering. But Frankl's insight goes deeper than simple positivity. He realized that those who survived the camps weren't necessarily the strongest or the most optimistic. They were the ones who found a purpose that transcended their immediate suffering. They transformed themselves from victims into creators of meaning. And this transformation, this is what makes someone psychologically indestructible. You see, most people live in what psychologists call a reactive state. Something happens, they react. Someone says something, they respond. Life pushes, they get pushed. But there's another way to exist, a proactive state where you become the cause rather than the effect, where you generate reality rather than respond to it. Alfred Adler, one of the founding figures of psychology, discovered that all human behavior is goal-oriented. But here's the twist. Most people don't know what their real goals are. They think they want success, love, happiness. But underneath, they're often driven by a desperate need to avoid feeling inferior. This inferiority complex runs their entire life without them knowing it. The truly powerful individuals Adler studied had done something remarkable. They had faced their deepest sense of inferiority, looked it straight in the eye, and instead of running from it, they used it as fuel. They transformed their greatest weakness into their defining strength, not by overcoming it, but by integrating it into their identity. This is the paradox that most people never grasp. Strength doesn't come from having no weaknesses. It comes from being so intimate with your weaknesses that they can no longer be used against you. When you know exactly where you're vulnerable, when you've made peace with your limitations, you become paradoxically invulnerable. B.F. Skinner, the behaviorist who showed how easily humans can be conditioned, revealed something terrifying about our nature. We are incredibly programmable. Our behaviors, thoughts, even our desires can be shaped by external forces without our awareness. But hidden in his research was also the key to freedom. If we can be programmed by others, we can also program ourselves. This is where the real work begins, not in fighting against your conditioning, but in deliberately reconditioning yourself, in becoming both the scientist and the experiment, in treating your own mind as a laboratory where you can test, modify, and upgrade your psychological operating system. But this process, it's not comfortable. It requires you to become comfortable with discomfort itself, to seek out the very experiences that challenge your existing mental models, to deliberately put yourself in situations where your old patterns don't work, forcing your brain to create new ones. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, said something that still disturbs people today. He said we are condemned to be free, that the weight of absolute responsibility for our lives is so heavy that most people will do anything to avoid it. They'll follow leaders, join movements, adopt ideologies, anything to escape the terrible burden of true freedom. But those who accept this burden, those who embrace the weight of total responsibility, they undergo a transformation that can only be described as rebirth. They stop being products of their circumstances and start being creators of their reality. They stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" This is the ultimate psychological transformation, from victim to creator, from effect to cause, from passenger to driver. And once this shift happens, once you truly internalize that you are the author of your own existence, you become unstoppable. Not because you're stronger than others, but because you're playing an entirely different game. The ancient Stoics knew this secret thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, wrote in his private journal about the ultimate power, the power over one's own mind. He understood that external circumstances are largely outside our control, but our internal response is entirely within it. And that small distinction, that tiny gap between stimulus and response, that's where all human power lives. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what these ancient thinkers intuited. Our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on our thoughts and behaviors. This neuroplasticity means that we can literally reshape our minds through conscious effort. We can strengthen neural pathways that serve us and weaken ones that don't. We can become architects of our own consciousness. But here's what nobody tells you about this process. It's lonely. The more you transform, the fewer people will understand you. The stronger your mind becomes, the more isolated you may feel, not because you're pushing people away, but because you're operating at a frequency that most people can't tune into. This is the price of psychological evolution. You leave behind the comfort of the herd. You abandon the safety of shared delusions. You step out of the cave of shadows that Plato described and into the blinding light of reality. And most people, they'll want you to come back to the cave. They'll tell you the shadows are real and the light is dangerous. But once you've seen the light, once you've tasted true psychological freedom, there's no going back. You've crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. You've become something that most people will never understand. A self-created being. A person who writes their own story rather than reading from someone else's script. This is what it means to become unstoppable. Not invincible, but unstoppable. Not perfect, but complete. Not without fear, but moving forward despite it. You become someone who generates their own momentum, creates their own meaning, defines their own success. The question now is simple but profound. Are you ready for this transformation? Are you prepared to let go of who you've been, to become who you could be? Are you willing to pay the price of psychological freedom? If your answer is yes, if something deep inside you is stirring right now, then your journey has already begun. The very fact that you've listened this far means something in you is ready to change. Something in you recognizes the truth in these words. Comment below with these words: I choose transformation over comfort. Make this declaration not for me, but for yourself. Because the moment you choose growth over safety, the moment you choose truth over comfort, that's the moment your real life begins. The next video will take you even deeper into this process. It will show you the specific techniques that accelerate psychological transformation. But don't watch it unless you're serious about change. Because once you know these methods, once you understand how to reprogram your own mind, you'll have no more excuses. The choice will be entirely yours.